The radar operator aboard USS Archerfish submarine designation SS-311 detected contact at approximately 12 miles range during evening of November 28, 1944, when Balao-class submarine was patrolling waters south of Nagoya, Japan, having been released from primary mission of providing lifeguard services for B-29 Superfortress bombers, conducting first strategic bombing raids against Tokyo because no airstrikes had been scheduled for that day, giving Commander Joseph Francis Enright freedom to hunt enemy vessels in approaches to Tokyo Bay, where Japanese naval traffic remained active despite increasing American submarine presence that had decimated merchant fleet and threatened remaining capital ships of Imperial Japanese Navy. The initial radar return suggested large vessel, possibly tanker, departing Tokyo Bay, escorted by multiple smaller contacts. That lookout subsequently identified through optical observation as aircraft carrier, accompanied by destroyer screen, creating target opportunity that submarine commanders dreamed about but rarely encountered because Japanese carriers had become increasingly scarce following devastating losses at Philippine Sea and Leyte Gulf, leaving few operational flight decks available to support Imperial Navy's dwindling capabilities, and the presence of this carrier departing Tokyo Bay at night without air cover indicated either extreme urgency or desperate circumstances that forced Japanese Naval Command to risk valuable asset in waters where American submarines prowled with increasing impunity. Commander Enright faced tactical challenge requiring patience and seamanship because aircraft carrier and escorts maintained speed exceeding 20 knots, significantly faster than Archerfish's maximum surface speed of approximately 20 knots, creating situation where direct pursuit would fail to close range sufficiently for submerged torpedo attack. And additionally, Japanese ships had apparently detected Archerfish through their own radar systems, beginning series of zigzag maneuvers intended to evade potential submarine contact while maintaining general course toward destination, presumably Kure Naval Base, where most major Japanese warships received repairs and outfitting. The pursuit that followed demonstrated Enright's tactical acumen because rather than attempting direct chase from astern, where submarines' limited speed made closing impossible, he instead analyzed enemy course and predicted future position, allowing Archerfish to maneuver ahead of target track, where favorable geometry would provide shooting opportunity if carrier maintained predicted heading. And this cat-and-mouse game continued for over 6 hours, during which Enright surfaced Archerfish to maintain contact during radar while remaining hull down on horizon, where visual detection by Japanese lookouts remained unlikely in darkness. Though radar detection represented continuous risk that could trigger Japanese commanders' decision to radically alter course or increase speed beyond Archerfish's ability to maintain pursuit. The submarine that Commander Enright commanded represented culmination of American diesel-electric submarine development during World War II, embodying lessons learned from earlier classes and incorporating improvements that made Balao-class arguably most effective submarine design of conflict, with 120 boats completed between 1942 and 1947, creating largest submarine class ever built for United States Navy. USS Archerfish's keel had been laid at Portsmouth Navy Yard in Kittery, Maine, on January 22, 1943, with launch occurring on May 28 and commissioning on September 4 under command of Lieutenant Commander George W. Keel, creating timeline from keel laying to commissioning of approximately 7 months, and the submarine displaced 1,526 tons surfaced and 2,414 tons submerged, measuring 311 feet 9 inches in length, with beam of 27 feet 3 inches and draft of 15 feet 3 inches. Creating platform optimized for extended patrols in vast expanses of Pacific Ocean, where American submarines conducted unrestricted warfare against Japanese shipping. The propulsion plant aboard Balao-class submarines consisted of 4 diesel engines, either General Motors Winton 16-cylinder or Fairbanks Morse 9-cylinder opposed piston designs, driving electrical generators that charged two massive 126-cell Sargo battery banks, which in turn powered electric motors driving twin propellers through reduction gears. And this diesel-electric arrangement provided maximum surface speed of 20 1/4 knots when running on diesel engines with batteries being charged simultaneously, or 8 3/4 knots when submerged running on battery power alone, with submerged endurance of approximately 48 hours, at 2 knots before battery depletion required surfacing to run diesels for recharging. The cruising range of 11,000 nautical miles at 10 knots surface speed provided Balao-class boats capability to transit vast distances from Pearl Harbor to patrol areas near Japanese home islands, conduct extended operations, and return to base without refueling, creating operational flexibility that allowed American submarine force to maintain continuous presence in critical areas despite limited number of boats available for deployment. And this extended range proved particularly valuable for war patrols near Japan, where transit distances exceeded 3,000 miles each way from forward bases at Midway or Guam. The armament suite that made Balao-class submarines deadly adversaries consisted primarily of 10 21-inch torpedo tubes with 6 forward-facing tubes in bow and 4 aft-facing tubes in stern, plus reload capacity, for total of 24 torpedoes carried in forward and after torpedo rooms where torpedo men maintained weapons in constant readiness and manually loaded 3,400-pound Mark 14 or Mark 18 torpedoes into tubes using block and tackle systems requiring 6 to 8 men per reload, taking approximately 5 to 10 minutes under ideal conditions, though extending to 15 or 20 minutes during rough seas or evasive maneuvers. The Mark 14 steam-powered torpedo that equipped most American submarines during latter half of war had finally been debugged after catastrophic reliability problems during first 2 years of conflict when magnetic exploders failed to detonate. Contact exploders crushed without firing, and depth-keeping mechanisms ran too deep, missing targets entirely, and these problems had been systematically corrected through field modifications and design improvements, creating weapon that achieved range of 4,500 yards at 46 knots high-speed setting, or 9,000 yards at 31 knots low-speed setting with 650-pound Torpex warhead, providing devastating explosive power when contact exploder functioned properly. The Mark 18 electric torpedo, introduced later in war, provided wakeless alternative using battery power rather than steam propulsion, eliminating telltale wake that sometimes warned targets of incoming torpedoes, allowing evasive action. And this weapon achieved range of 4,000 yards at 29 knots, carrying slightly smaller warhead, but offering tactical advantage of invisibility during final approach. Though complications with battery maintenance and sensitivity to temperature variations created operational challenges that limited widespread adoption. The deck armament aboard Archerfish included 5-inch 25 caliber gun mounted forward of conning tower, providing surface gunnery capability against smaller vessels or targets not worth expending torpedoes, plus anti-aircraft armament consisting of 40mm Bofors gun and 20mm Oerlikon gun for defense against aircraft. Though submarine doctrine emphasized submerging when aircraft appeared, rather than attempting surface engagement, where thin hull offered minimal protection against aerial weapons. The tactical situation that brought Archerfish into position to intercept Japanese carrier involved complex interplay of intelligent submarine positioning doctrine and opportunistic patrol patterns that characterized American submarine operations during final year of Pacific War, when Japanese merchant fleet had been largely destroyed, forcing submarines to seek increasingly scarce naval targets. Commander Enright had assumed command of Archerfish on September 29, 1944, relieving Commander William Wright, whose earlier patrols had achieved limited success, creating pressure on Enright to demonstrate aggressive leadership and tactical competence. And this pressure was compounded by Enright's previous command experience aboard USS Dace, where he had been relieved for excessive caution after failing to press attack against Japanese carrier Shokaku, creating career setback that threatened his future in submarine force. The assignment to Archerfish represented opportunity for redemption, where successful patrol could restore Enright's reputation and validate Submarine Command's decision to give him second chance, and the appearance of large Japanese carrier on November 28th provided exactly the type of target that could transform mediocre patrol into historic achievement if Enright could successfully prosecute attack against vessel protected by destroyer escort and capable of significantly higher speed than pursuing submarine. The carrier that Archerfish pursued through darkness of November 28th was IJN Shinano, whose existence remained unknown to American intelligence despite her massive size and strategic importance, because Japanese security measures had successfully concealed construction and conversion from 3rd Yamato-class battleship into support carrier designed to service and rearm other carriers rather than operating as fleet carrier with full air group. Shinano's keel had been laid at Yokosuka Naval Arsenal on May 4, 1940, as 3rd unit of Yamato-class super battleship program intended to give Imperial Navy decisive superiority over any potential adversary through combination of unprecedented armor protection and main battery of 9 18-inch guns arranged in 3 triple turrets, and construction had proceeded steadily until Battle of Midway in June 1942, when catastrophic loss of 4 fleet carriers, Akagikaga Hiryu and Soryu, forced Japanese Naval Command to reconsider priorities and redirect Shinano's partially complete hull toward carrier construction rather than completing her as battleship. The conversion from battleship to carrier created unique vessel whose characteristics differed substantially from conventional fleet carriers. Because advanced state of battleship construction when conversion order was issued meant that much of Yamato-class armored hull remained intact, creating carrier with battleship-grade protection unprecedented among aircraft carriers, where designers typically sacrificed armor for greater aircraft capacity and operational flexibility. Shinano displaced approximately 72,000 tons fully loaded, making her largest aircraft carrier constructed up to that time period, exceeding American Essex-class carriers by over 40,000 tons, and dwarfing earlier Japanese fleet carriers whose displacements ranged from 25 to 35,000 tons, and this massive displacement derived from retention of Yamato-class underwater protection system, including anti-torpedo bulges and thick armor belt, plus armored flight deck capable of resisting bomb hits that would penetrate unarmored wooden decks aboard American carriers. Though this protection came at cost of reduced hangar capacity limiting air group to approximately 47 aircraft compared to 90-plus aircraft aboard Essex-class. The armament suite aboard Shinano reflected her hybrid battleship carrier heritage with 16 5-inch dual-purpose guns in 8 twin mounts, providing anti-aircraft defense, plus numerous 25mm anti-aircraft guns arranged in triple mounts around flight deck and superstructure, creating formidable defensive barrage, and the ship's propulsion plant consisted of 4 geared turbine sets, generating total of 150,000 shaft horsepower, driving 4 propellers, providing maximum speed of approximately 27 knots. Though mechanical problems with propeller shafts during sea trials had forced reduction to 18 knots to prevent damage, creating speed limitation that would prove fatal during encounter with Archerfish. The flight deck measured 840 feet in length and 120 feet in width, creating adequate operating space for aircraft operations, though Shinano's primary mission involved supporting other carriers through rearming and refueling rather than conducting independent strike operations, and her intended air group consisted of 20 fighters, 20 bombers, and 7 reconnaissance aircraft supplemented by storage capacity for additional aircraft being transported to forward bases, creating mobile aviation depot rather than conventional strike carrier. The urgent circumstances surrounding Shinano's maiden voyage from Yokosuka to Kure reflected desperate strategic situation facing Imperial Navy in November 1944, when American forces had successfully invaded Philippines, threatening remaining Japanese positions in Southeast Asia, and when B-29 bombers had begun strategic bombing campaign against home islands, including Tokyo, where Shinano's incomplete state made her vulnerable to aerial attack while moored at Yokosuka. Captain Toshio Abe, commanding officer of Shinano, had preferred daylight transit to Kure, which would have provided additional time for crew training and allowed destroyer escorts to rest before departure, but Navy General Staff could not guarantee air cover for daylight passage forcing nighttime departure that exposed carrier to submarine threat, while limiting opportunities for crew familiarization with ship systems and damage control procedures. The cargo aboard Shinano during this maiden voyage included 50 Yokosuka MXY-7, Oka rocket-powered kamikaze flying bombs, and 6 Shinyo suicide boats being transported to forward bases for use in desperate defense of Philippines, demonstrating extent to which Japanese military had embraced suicide tactics as primary means of inflicting casualties on American forces, and the presence of these weapons aboard incomplete carrier during transit to fitting out base reflected urgency with which Japanese command sought to employ any available assets against overwhelming American naval superiority. The destroyer escort accompanying Shinano consisted of 3 ships, Hamikaze Yukikaze and Isokaze, representing cream of Japanese destroyer force. With these vessels having survived multiple engagements and demonstrated superior seamanship, though their anti-submarine capabilities remained limited compared to American destroyer escorts equipped with advanced sonar Hedgehog forward-throwing weapons and extensive training in anti-submarine warfare. Captain Abe erroneously believed that contact with submarine indicated presence of American wolfpack rather than lone opponent, creating tactical assumption that influenced his subsequent decisions to turn away from submarine contacts rather than ordering escorts to aggressively prosecute attacks, and this fundamental misunderstanding of tactical situation created opportunities for Archerfish to maneuver into favorable attack position because Abe's evasive turns repeatedly brought Shinano back into projected track of pursuing submarine rather than opening range as intended. At approximately 02:56 hours on November 29th, Captain Abe ordered course change that turned Shinano southwest, exposing entire length of carrier's starboard side to Archerfish, which had successfully positioned ahead of target track after 6.5 hour surface pursuit, and Commander Enright immediately recognized this as optimal firing solution with range approximately 1,400 yards, providing near certainty of hits if torpedoes functioned properly, and ran straight toward massive target that presented profile exceeding 800 feet in length. Enright ordered Archerfish to submerge and fired 6 Mark 14 torpedoes from forward tubes at 03:15 hours with weapons set to run shallow at 10 feet depth, rather than deeper settings normally used to ensure hits below waterline where anti-torpedo protection was strongest, because shallow setting increased probability of hitting carrier even if torpedoes ran slightly deeper than set depth. And this tactical decision reflected lessons learned from earlier torpedo failures when weapons ran too deep, passing harmlessly beneath targets. The torpedo salvo from Archerfish achieved devastating success, with 4 of 6 weapons striking Shinano's starboard side between anti-torpedo bulge and waterline, creating impacts that breached hull integrity and initiated progressive flooding that would ultimately doom carrier despite her massive displacement and elaborate damage control systems. Enright observed first 2 torpedo hits through periscope, seeing bright flashes illuminate night sky before ordering Archerfish to dive to 400 feet to avoid depth charge counterattack from destroyer escorts, and the submarine crew heard 4 distinct explosions corresponding to torpedo hits, plus sounds of breaking up noises that Enright interpreted as indication of catastrophic damage, though actual sinking would require over 7 hours as progressive flooding overwhelmed damage control efforts. The torpedo impacts occurred at critical junction between armored belt on upper hull and anti-torpedo bulge on underwater portion, where design flaws in Yamato-class construction created vulnerability that post-war American Naval Technical Mission identified as fundamental weakness shared by all 3 Yamato-class ships, and these hits opened flooding paths that connected multiple compartments, allowing water to spread beyond immediate damage areas faster than pumping systems could remove accumulated water. The initial reaction aboard Shinano to torpedo strikes reflected dangerous combination of overconfidence in ship's survivability and inadequate crew training, where damage control parties lacked experience necessary to properly assess flooding extent and implement effective countermeasures. Captain Abe initially believed damage was manageable and ordered Shinano to maintain maximum speed toward Kure, under assumption that forward motion would help control flooding through dynamic forces, though opposite proved true, as high-speed forced water through damaged areas at increased rate, accelerating progressive flooding, and this decision to continue at high speed rather than reducing to damage control speed represented critical error that transformed survivable damage into fatal casualty. The inexperienced crew, many of whom had been assigned to Shinano only days before departure, lacked familiarity with ship's compartmentation and damage control equipment, creating confusion during emergency response when rapid coordinated action was essential, and incomplete fitting out meant that many watertight doors had not yet been installed, creating open paths for flooding to spread between compartments that should have been isolated from each other. As hours passed after initial torpedo hits, flooding continued spreading through compartments below waterline, despite efforts by damage control parties to shore bulkheads, plug holes, and operate pumps at maximum capacity, removing water from affected spaces, and by approximately 0600 hours, Shinano had lost electrical power in many compartments as flooding reached generator spaces, forcing crew to work in darkness using battle lanterns while attempting to control damage that exceeded available resources. The progressive list to starboard that developed as flooding accumulated on that side made movement difficult throughout ship and complicated damage control efforts, as loose equipment began sliding across decks and water sloshed between compartments, creating dynamic stability problems that threatened to capsize vessel, and by approximately 0900 hours list had increased to approximately 15 degrees, making normal movement nearly impossible while flooding continued spreading into previously dry spaces through hull penetrations and inadequately secured openings. Captain Abe finally ordered abandon ship at approximately 10:30 hours on November 29th, when it became obvious that Shinano could not be saved and that capsizing was imminent, creating risk of trapping crew below decks if evacuation was further delayed, and destroyer escorts moved alongside to take off survivors, though heavy seas and increasing list made transfer difficult, resulting in casualties among sailors attempting to jump between vessels or swim to rescue ships. At approximately 10:57 hours, Shinano capsized to starboard, rolling completely over before sinking in. Approximately 1,320 feet of water, taking with her approximately 1,100 sailors who had been unable to escape, including Captain Abe, who chose to go down with his ship following naval tradition, and total of 1,436 survivors were rescued by destroyer escorts, creating casualty rate approaching 45%, substantially higher than typical warship losses, where most crew could usually be saved if sufficient time was available for evacuation. The strategic and psychological impact of Shinano's loss on Japanese naval operations proved devastating because carrier represented significant investment of resources and industrial capacity during period when Japan's war production was collapsing under sustained American bombing and naval blockade. And the fact that newest and largest carrier had been sunk on maiden voyage by single submarine before ever conducting combat operations created profound sense of futility among naval personnel who recognized that American submarine force had achieved such dominance that no Japanese vessel could transit safely even in waters near home islands. The security surrounding Shinano's existence meant that loss could not be publicly acknowledged, creating additional psychological burden as families of lost sailors received no official notification, and Naval Command could not explain circumstances of disaster without revealing existence of ship whose construction had been most closely guarded secret of Japanese naval program. And this enforced silence compounded grief of survivors and families while denying Japanese public any understanding of magnitude of loss. Commander Enright and crew of Archerfish remained unaware of their achievement's full significance until after war's end when captured. Japanese documents revealed Shinano's identity and displacement, and initial credit awarded to Enright was for sinking 28,000-ton Yamato-class carrier based on sketches Enright submitted depicting target. He had attacked, creating situation where Archerfish received less recognition than warranted for several months until proper identification could be made. The Navy Cross awarded to Enright and Presidential Unit Citation awarded to Archerfish represented recognition of tactical success, though actual strategic impact exceeded what these decorations suggested because Shinano's loss eliminated capability that Japanese Navy desperately needed for supporting remaining carrier operations in defense of Philippines and home islands, and her sinking demonstrated that American submarines had achieved such technological and tactical superiority that Japanese Navy could no longer protect even most valuable assets from submarine attack. The record established by Archerfish sinking of Shinano as largest warship ever sunk by submarine has never been exceeded, and likely never will be given that aircraft carriers of comparable size to Shinano are now nuclear-powered vessels serving navies that would not be operating in environments where hostile submarines could achieve undetected attack positions. The preservation of Archerfish's operational legacy through museum displays and historical documentation ensures that this remarkable achievement remains accessible to subsequent generations, who can study tactical decisions and technical capabilities that enabled successful attack against seemingly impregnable target, and the contrast between Archerfish's modest displacement of approximately 2,400 tons submerged and Shinano's massive 72,000 tons fully loaded emphasizes asymmetric nature of submarine warfare, where small stealthy platforms can destroy vastly larger surface vessels through combination of tactical positioning, technological capability, and crew expertise. The personal redemption story of Commander Joseph Francis Enright adds human dimension to Archerfish's achievement because his previous relief from command of USS Dace in April 1943 had occurred after failed attack against Japanese carrier Shokaku, when Enright hesitated to press home attack despite favorable tactical position, creating perception among submarine command that he lacked aggressive spirit necessary for successful submarine commander. And this relief had devastated Enright professionally because submarine force represented tight-knit community where relief for cause created lasting stigma that could end officer's career. The opportunity to command Archerfish represented second chance that few relieved commanding officers received, because Submarine Force Commander Vice Admiral Charles Lockwood recognized that Enright possessed technical competence and tactical knowledge even if earlier performance had fallen short of aggressive standards, and Lockwood's willingness to give Enright another opportunity reflected broader understanding that submarine warfare required combination of caution and aggression, where timing and judgment determined success or failure rather than simple aggressive impulses. The earlier war patrols conducted by Archerfish under her first commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander George Keel, had achieved limited success with first patrol from December 1943 through February 1944, conducting operations north of Formosa, attacking 3 ships but scoring no confirmed kills before returning to Midway, and second patrol from March through April 1944, covering 42 days at sea near Palau Islands, similarly failed to encounter worthwhile targets returning to Pearl Harbor without combat achievements. The third patrol under Keel from late May through July 1944 included lifeguard duty during strikes against Iwo Jima, where Archerfish successfully rescued downed aviator Ensign John B. Anderson on July 4th, demonstrating valuable secondary mission that submarines performed supporting carrier air operations, and fourth patrol from August through September under Commander William Wright again failed to bag enemy ships during 53 days, prowling waters off Honshu, creating pattern of unsuccessful patrols that required explanation beyond simple bad luck. The 5th Patrol under Commander Enright beginning October 30, 1944, would transform Archerfish from mediocre performer into legendary submarine through combination of tactical opportunity and Enright's willingness to pursue contact aggressively during 6-hour chase that demonstrated patience and tactical acumen. His earlier relief might have suggested he lacked. The assignment of lifeguard duty for 1st B-29 strikes against Tokyo provided Enright with legitimate reason to patrol near Japanese home islands, where naval traffic remained relatively heavy despite American submarine presence and cancellation of air raids on November 28th. Freed Archerfish from specific lifeguard station, allowing roaming patrol that positioned her near Tokyo Bay exit routes, where Japanese carriers would transit if moving between major naval bases. The construction history of Shinano reveals remarkable security achievement by Japanese Naval Command, because despite massive size and extended construction period, American intelligence failed to detect carriers' existence through photographic reconnaissance decoded radio messages or agent reports, creating intelligence failure comparable to Japanese surprise at American carrier strength during earlier battles. The decision to construct Shinano in graving dock rather than slipway allowed Japanese to erect tall fence on 3 sides of construction area, preventing aerial observation while workers were confined to yard compound and faced severe punishment, including potential death penalty, for discussing ship's existence with unauthorized personnel, and these draconian security measures proved effective because Shinano was only major warship built during 20th century that was never officially photographed during construction phase. The first photographic evidence of Shinano's existence came from Japanese aircraft conducting overhead photography in mid-October 1944, intended to review camouflage efforts concealing carrier while in dry dock, and subsequently Boeing B-29 Superfortress. Conducting reconnaissance mission on November 1st, photographed Shinano near Yokosuka harbor entrance from altitude of 32,000 feet. Providing American intelligence with first indication that major new carrier existed, though analysts initially misidentified her as modified battleship rather than recognizing true nature. The conversion work transforming Shinano from battleship to carrier required extensive modification to original Yamato-class design because flight deck installation demanded removal of main battery turrets and superstructure, while armored hangar and supporting structure needed to be built on battleship hull never intended to carry such loads, and this conversion work continued from June 1942 through November 1944, creating extended construction period during which American bombing raids increasingly threatened Yokosuka, forcing acceleration of final fitting out that left many systems incomplete when carrier was commissioned. The decision to commission Shinano on November 19th, despite incomplete state, reflected urgent need to remove her from Yokosuka, where vulnerability to B-29 raids threatened total loss before carrier could become operational, and Captain Abe's orders directed immediate transit to Kure, where final fitting out could continue under better security conditions away from range of Mariana-based bombers. Though this urgency created situation where inexperienced crew departed on maiden voyage aboard ship. They barely knew, with damage control procedures untested and many critical systems still requiring installation. The fatal design flaw identified by post-war American naval technical mission to Japan involved junction between waterline armor belt on upper hull and anti-torpedo bulge on underwater portion, where inadequate overlap created vulnerability, allowing torpedo impacts to breach hull integrity more extensively than properly designed junction would have permitted. And this flaw derived from original Yamato-class battleship design, where armor belt terminated at specific waterline leaving gap that anti-torpedo bulge was supposed to protect but failed to overlap sufficiently. The torpedo hits from Archerfish struck precisely at this vulnerable junction, opening flooding paths that connected multiple compartments and allowing progressive flooding to spread faster than damage control measures could contain. And examination of salvaged components after war revealed that proper installation of watertight doors and adequate crew training in damage control might have prevented fatal outcome, even given inherent design weakness. Though combination of design flaw, incomplete fitting out, and inexperienced crew created perfect storm of vulnerabilities that doomed Shinano. The comparison between Shinano's loss and survival of American carriers damaged during Pacific War reveals striking differences in damage control doctrine and crew training, where American carriers routinely survived multiple bomb and torpedo hits through aggressive damage control efforts by well-trained crews who understood compartmentation systems and possessed equipment necessary to control flooding and fight fires. USS Yorktown survived extensive damage at Coral Sea and continued operating at Midway despite severe battle damage before finally being sunk by Japanese submarine after battle when reduced crew aboard stopped ship made damage control impossible, and USS Franklin survived catastrophic fires from kamikaze attacks off Okinawa, killing over 800 crew members but remaining afloat through heroic damage control efforts, demonstrating that even worst-case scenarios could be survived with proper training and equipment. USS Lexington, USS Hornet, and USS Wasp were lost during carrier battles, but in each case, ships fought for hours before abandonment, creating opportunities for crew evacuation that minimized casualties, and comparison with Shinano's rapid capsizing less than 8 hours after torpedo hits while still underway, demonstrated fundamental differences in damage control capabilities between American and Japanese naval forces. The tactical lessons derived from Archerfish's successful attack influenced post-war submarine doctrine, emphasizing patience in pursuing high-value targets and willingness to conduct extended surface chases when tactical situation required maintaining contact despite risks of counter-detection, and Enright's decision to pursue contact for over 6 hours despite multiple course changes by target demonstrated confidence in submarines' ability to remain undetected on surface at night when visual detection range remained limited. The use of radar to maintain contact while remaining hull down on horizon represented evolution in submarine tactics, where electronic sensors supplemented visual observation, allowing continuous tracking without closing to ranges where visual detection became likely, and this combination of radar tracking and careful maneuvering to achieve favorable attack position exemplified mature submarine tactics that characterized American operations during final year of Pacific War, when technological advantages and tactical experience created decisive superiority over Japanese anti-submarine capabilities. The post-war career of Archerfish included continued service during occupation period when submarine entered Tokyo Bay on August 31, 1945, as one of 12 submarines that moored alongside tender USS Proteus near Yokosuka Navy Yard, where ironically Shinano had been constructed, and presence of Archerfish in same harbor where her victim had been built created poignant symbol of American victory and Japanese defeat. The subsequent assignments for Archerfish included various research missions throughout Eastern Pacific, testing new equipment and training personnel until declared unfit for naval service and struck from Navy list on May 1, 1968, and final disposition came on October 19, 1968, when Archerfish was sunk as torpedo target by nuclear submarine USS Snook. Off San Diego, creating end fitting for Submarine, whose greatest achievement had been sinking target with torpedoes. The 7 battle stars and Presidential Unit Citation awarded to Archerfish for World War II service represented recognition of her contributions. Though single achievement of sinking Shinano overshadowed all other operations during her wartime career, creating legacy defined by one perfect attack that achieved what submarine commanders dreamed about but rarely accomplished. The discovery of Shinano's wreck remained unfulfilled goal for underwater explorers and naval historians because depth of approximately 1,320 feet exceeded capabilities of conventional diving equipment, while precise location remained uncertain due to lack of surviving records from destroyer escorts that witnessed sinking, and attempts to locate wreck using side-scan sonar and remotely operated vehicles failed to identify definitive target among numerous wrecks littering approaches to Tokyo Bay, where combat operations and post-war disposal created underwater graveyard. The potential archaeological significance of Shinano wreck site derives from her status as largest warship sunk during World War II and from unique characteristics as converted Yamato-class battleship whose underwater protection system and armored construction differed substantially from conventional carriers, and examination of torpedo damage patterns could provide definitive evidence about effectiveness of American torpedoes and vulnerability of Japanese hull design, though salvage operations would be prohibited by Japanese government treating site as war grave containing remains of over 1,000 sailors. The comparison between resources invested in Shinano's construction and her operational achievements reveals tragic futility of Japanese naval strategy during final years of Pacific War, when industrial capacity was diverted to projects that could not be completed in time to influence war's outcome, and when trained personnel became increasingly scarce, making operation of complex vessels like Shinano impossible, even if construction could be completed. The approximately 70,000 tons of steel used in Shinano's construction could have built multiple destroyers or submarines that might have achieved actual operational service rather than being lost on maiden voyage, and 10,000 workers employed for 30 months at Yokosuka Naval Arsenal represented diversion of skilled labor from other projects during period when Japan's industrial production was collapsing under American bombing and naval blockade. The assignment of relatively inexperienced crew to Shinano reflected broader crisis in Japanese naval personnel, where combat losses and expansion of fleet had exhausted pool of trained sailors, creating situations where major warships operated with crews whose training was inadequate for complex damage control and combat operations. And this personnel crisis contributed as much to Shinano's loss as design flaws or tactical mistakes, because properly trained crew might have contained flooding even given inherent vulnerabilities. The psychological impact on Japanese naval morale of Shinano's loss, combined with earlier carrier losses at Philippine Sea and Leyte Gulf, left Imperial Navy with virtually no operational carrier capability for defending Philippines or supporting operations against American invasion forces, and this collapse of carrier aviation meant that Japanese Navy increasingly relied on kamikaze tactics using conventional aircraft and suicide boats because lack of carriers eliminated possibility of coordinated air-sea operations that had characterized earlier phases of Pacific War. The strategic bankruptcy of Japanese naval strategy became increasingly obvious during final months of war, when remaining surface units, including battleships Yamato and Musashi, were expended in suicide missions rather than being held for potential decisive battle, and loss of Shinano before she could contribute anything to Japanese war effort exemplified futility of continuing resistance against overwhelming American material superiority that made Japanese defeat inevitable regardless of individual tactical successes or defensive determination.